From Boca Raton, Florida, Rabbis Ephraim Goldberg, Philip Moskowitz, and Josh Brody are taking you behind the Bima. The BRS rabbis schmooze about contemporary issues and talk to special guests who give a behind-the-scenes look at how they got to where they are and what keeps them going. Welcome to Behind the Bima.
Good evening. It is Wednesday night, 9 p.m. I am Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg, joined by my dear colleague, chaver, and friend, Rabbi Joshua Brody, and we are here to take you
behind the Bima.
We're here to take you behind the Bima. Took you a little long. You're a little off your game there, Rabbi Brody. We're here to take you behind the Bima live, Wednesday night, 9 p.m. We got a great episode tonight. Great conversation. Really excited. This book is so popular. In fact, it's sold out. It just came out, and it already sold out its first printing, and it's being sold like it's already, there's a market. People are trying to resell it online at a profit.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Should I sell my copy?
Autograph copy.
Sell my copy. We got a great sponsor tonight. Want to thank our American friends of Ateres Kohanim, supporting the critical work of Ateres Kohanim in the old city of Yerushalayim. If you don't know Ateres Kohanim, you should know them. Ateres Kohanim are just amazing. Rav Aviner is the Rosh Yeshiva. Mati Dan is incredible work. Amazing people doing just incredible things. Reclaiming, claiming, of course, the Jewish connection to the Halachic, the holy old city of Yerushalayim, getting ready for Mashiach to come and the building of the Beis HaMikdash. They're doing amazing things. Ateres Kohanim, the yeshiva, Ateres Kohanim, the movement, Ateres Kohanim in the old city, in the so-called Muslim quarter. If you've never taken that tour with Mati Dan, our friend Mati Dan, you're missing something. So a big thanks to American friends of Ateres Kohanim. Big shout out next week, Yom Yerushalayim, for the amazing work that they are doing. And everyone, if you're not familiar, check them out. It's really, really worthwhile. Rabbi Brody.
Hey, these guys are going to have a front row seat when Mashiach comes, hopefully tonight, right? But they're going to be all there. They've got all these great properties. We've got to get in with them, like a little BRS in the old city.
They are right there.
Yeah,
100%. Right.
Wow.
Did you check out any of the King's coronation?
No, I didn't. But I did get an email.
I like the honesty.
That it was happening.
I like that you hesitated there. You were trying to decide which way to go.
Should I go right in or
do I bluff this? Am I honest? Do I pretend I saw it? Or should I
first I was like, which king are we talking about? King Charles III? Is he king now?
Charles III. Yeah.
Wow.
He's legit.
Amazing. Rabbi Frand would always say that if someone's, not in Gateshead Yeshiva and you happen to be in London, go check out the changing of the guard. If you want to understand what Malchus is, go check out the
Gemara said, the Chazal said that. Our great rabbi said, if you want to understand monarchy, royalty, power, kingship in the supreme sense, obviously, lahavdil, very different than basar v'dam, human beings. But when you're exposed to that, we're missing that. We don't have the amos to malchus here. We're living in a time of democracy, and our elected officials, they work for us. Right. And certainly of late, I mean, I remember it wasn't that long ago, APAC and other fundraising events, you'd meet a senator, you'd meet a congressman, you wanted a picture with them, you felt so cool, you felt so connected, you could try to influence policy. Today, like a congressman wants to come near you, and you're like,
I can't really take a picture with you right now.
Yeah, I'm not knocking anybody. Our new congressman actually is a wonderful person doing great stuff for Israel, Jared Moskowitz, and we're excited. In fact, we're going to have him on Behind the Beam at some point, our new congressman. He's doing great things on Israel and on the things that matter the most to us.
I'm sure many of our listeners from around the United States are probably wondering why would they care about a congressman in South Florida? But like Ted Deitch would always say, is that might not be a congressman right now, but in a couple of years, you probably will be in my district.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be making your way to Florida. Exactly. No, so the world is different. But when you're exposed to royalty and kingship, but I'll tell you, I think on the whole, I didn't watch it, but of course I read or saw images afterwards, and all you have to do is, be on Jewish Twitter, social media, and you see all the memes and GIFs and attempts to have humor by, the king and his Bekisha, the king looks like Achashverosh, the king, you see all that. So, but I'll tell you what occurred to me is, I'm not saying it's the only way to live life and interpret the world, but we've to a certain degree been trained that we look at the world and ask, is this good or bad for the Jews? How does this connect to the Jews? And I was thinking that here you had this weekend where the world's eyes were on these ancient traditions, which really, from our perspective, many of which are bizarre, obscure, They're sort of mysterious. We don't really understand them. Whether it's the fact that the king is anointed with oil. By the way, the oil comes from Jerusalem, and that relates again lahavdil, but originates with us, and
It's very
of course our
interesting.
Torah and how the priests and kings are anointed and so on. But just the clothing that was worn and the rituals and the ceremonies and the traditions. So my thought is this. I think I once heard this from my mother. Anytime that the world is celebrating tradition and ritual, that's good for the Jews. Because so much of our life is informed by these traditions and rituals, and you could be cynical and scoff at them, or you could celebrate them. And when the world is celebrating them, not as ancient or archaic or bizarre or weird, but celebrating them, then that's amazing. I saw there were a few people who noted there's a niece, I think, of the new king. I think it's his niece. She's Princess something or other. She's so she was walking in the coronation, and her husband was wearing like a long black coat, like a coat with tails, and she is dressed as the way a princess should, with a long dress that very much is covering her up, and a little hat that looks like almost she's like a Hasidic lady with a hat on top of a sheitel. And somebody reposted that and basically said, you see that royalty wears a long black coat and a long modest dress.
Interesting.
And that notion that, when we talk about, and this really is our topic for tonight, we're going to bring on our guest soon, Rabbi Anthony Manning and Bracha Poliakoff, the authors of this great new book, Reclaiming Dignity, tackling a really tough subject to write about, to write something new about, to write something about that will have such diverse approbations and haskamas. But this notion of modesty, we often talk about, we're royalty, you're a princess, you're a prince, we're kings. This is how we carry ourselves, how we see ourselves, who we have to be. But that is so much of our, you'd make fun, or some don't relate to a Hasidim wearing a bekesha, wearing a frock, but you see, no one's making fun of it in England. It's tradition. It's tradition.
Right.
It's glorious. Right. It's royalty. It's
right.
Regal. Well, we're regal. Every Shabbos, we're regal. Every Shabbos, every day, we're royal. Princes and princesses. We're Banu Matem Hashem. We're the children of Hashem. So, I think there's a lot of jokes going on about it, but I think on the whole, it's good. Whenever the world pauses and celebrates tradition and ritual, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. First of all, it's very interesting. And I'm just wondering how I missed it, because I'm actually thinking back now. I do remember it was going to happen. And then I'm wondering, do you think most Americans, I'm not talking about the Jewish Americans, I'm just wondering most Americans are actually tuned in. I remember there was a time when King Charles or Prince Charles got engaged or married to Princess Diana. The world tuned in for the wedding. Like that was
I think they tuned in. I think people are curious. I think they're curious. Again, some cynics want to hate, but I think people are curious, and I think people are drawn to the tradition. Like, we live in this world that has, to such a large degree, the modern world that we're in, that almost arrogantly thinks that everything that we do that's new is better and more superior. But I think people are drawn to, there is a notion that the traditions that last, it's kind of comforting or reassuring that there are ancient or long-lasting traditions. And I think people are curious, just the whole notion. Certainly in America, you have no connection to a king and a queen and a prince and a princess, right, and all of that. They're fascinated by it. I don't know if we want it, but you're fascinated by it.
It kind of parallels all the parshas right now with the Big Day Kahuna, and you're talking about the Kohen Gadol and the inauguration.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's like the ultimate reality story, reality TV. Like, you're following the real life story of them.
Yeah,
so it is fascinating.
I'll just tell you also, I don't know why it just popped in my head right now, because you're talking about new traditions or ancient traditions and new things that are coming up. This Chat GBT or Chat AI, whatever they call it, I started using it for the last couple of days, and it is incredible. I've rewritten everything, all the great programs, we have Friday Night Live and Vishinantam, all the paragraphs.
You've rewritten?
That's what I'm saying. So now let me ask you a question. And this is, I don't know how you guys would feel about it, but I wish that I'm going to get a ghostwriter. I spoke to my daughter, Eliana. She's going to help me write some Divrei Torah. She says, you send me the idea, I can help develop it. What if I have my idea and I put it into Chat GBT and I come up with a great Torah? It's my idea. It's just writing it for me. It's writing out my ideas. Is there a problem?
No, I don't have a problem with that. Listen, it's funny. In a couple of shiurim I gave this week, apparently I was a little hostile towards ChatGPT. That, first of all, the notion that it's not human, it's not personal, it doesn't have a soul, it doesn't intuit. We believe, for example, when you ask halachah, I don't remember if we spoke about this on here, when you ask questions of Jewish law, so Sod Hashim Li Re'av, the halachic authority who's determining the law, is endowed with a certain divine inspiration. And a computer can't. It's not just a matter of counting the opinions or scouring the internet, and Google shouldn't be the last word. That's not that we're just talking about tradition, and we're talking about person-to-person learning and face-to-face. So Matthew, who helps us with all of our technology, and we'll be publishing this later tonight, who's my right hand in so many ways with all the global, being able to really share our Torah widely. I'm grateful to him for that. He operates in that space and he loves it. He took some offense to it. So there's Matthew, there's a lot of great ChatGPT, AI. There's enormous positives to it, and we're going to learn them. We just need to kapdeu v'chashdeu. I think there are a lot of concerns. I don't know if that we're doing this as carefully or incrementally or slowly or responsibly or with such regulations. So what are the unintended consequences? I read a study the other day about how many jobs is going to cost and what is going to mean, how many people it will replace and what it does. So is it your original idea? It's helping you write it. So you're taking advantage of a tool.
Yeah.
As a different on Microsoft Word when you can press a button and look for synonyms for the word you're looking for or spell check. But that's different than saying like, hey, ChatGPT, give me a Dvar Torah on Parshas Bahar. And then, the next thing you know, it's basically plagiarizing other people's.
Right.
So
No, I'm just giving you an example of some of the things that I just did. I just took the paragraphs we've written over the years for some of the great programs we have at the shul. And I said, just rewrite this using a certain tone. I put in a certain person's tone that I just think is great. Right. I'm a big Steve Jobs guy. I love Steve Jobs. I love the way he talks. It's very inspirational. Right. And it just rewrites it in such a way, which is, it's beautiful. It's like, if I spent a month trying to write it like that, I wouldn't,
that's
I
a great
wouldn't
tool.
achieve that.
It's a great tool, but what does it do for intellectual property? How do we know who's who? Let's say you put it in and you said, Friday Night Live is a Friday night program that we have for beginners, and we try to lift up the spirits and sing the soul. And could you write it and describe it in the style of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks?
Oh,
so now, and it does that because it has online.
Oh wow! Wait till you see the next version.
Everything he ever wrote, and it has videos of everything he's ever said.
Right.
And it in a millisecond, in no time, it's accessing and integrating and consolidating everything about Rabbi Sacks's style, his language, his delivery. So now, when you publish that in your name, did you plagiarize Rabbi Sacks?
What do you say?
On the one hand.
Publishing it where? Publishing it in our brochure? I'm not making money on it. I'm not making a book of it. I'm just wanting to get the word out about a program.
But wherever you post it, and you're not posting it with credit. So what's the intellectual property? Who really said it? Who really owns it? You know what? You know that these technology AI now, let's say we have so many. What number behind the Bima is this? I don't even know what number this is, but we're deep into behind the Bima. Where's our fact checker when you need him? Right? So there's so many behind the Bimas that we've had so many conversations. We've used almost every word, every letter, every syllable, different syntax. So someone could be like, produce a video of Goldberg and Brody talking about, I don't know what, and it will produce it, and it will make us, because our movements, it's able to create looking like we're actually saying those words. And because it has our voices saying almost every letter word, it could recombine them, and it could produce us having a conversation we never had. That's a scary world. That is
scary.
It's a scary thing to me. It'll be very hard to know what's true, what's not true, authentic, inauthentic, what's real, what's counterfeit, what's authoritative, and what's a computer, and what's the bias that goes into the computer. Whoever's programming and designing ChatGPT, what biases is it putting into the program that you don't realize are coming out? But
I'm wondering, when you write a Dvar Torah, I'm saying you're building upon lessons that you've learned from somewhere else, right? So I'm saying, so
is it that different?
I just can't recall it, and I can't put it into some great sentences that easily. So this thing does it for me.
There's Matthew right on cue, and this is episode 124. 124 are a lot of episodes, a lot of banter, a lot of schmoozing. We've got a few marathon episodes in there. So meaning you and I would have to go listen to 124 episodes and cut and paste and cut. Anyone remember the old days when you would dub tapes, mixtapes? You remember the effort that
I still have my mixtapes.
Mixtapes. So imagine you had to do that with 124 episodes. But you know what AI can do? It has them all.
It's not even.
They're all
right.
Just all.
Right.
So anyway, again, it's not. I don't think it makes sense to reject it wholesale. I just think that we have to be very judicious in the way we embrace it and what we do with it, and very thoughtful about the unintended consequences of it. What about kids and their ability to learn? And how will this change? Do they write papers? Do they study how they learn? Again, what's real? What are they tapping into?
I don't know how teachers are going to beat this. I mean, there's no
why do they
over already.
Why do kids need to even know anything ever again? Because just walk around with your phone and speak into ChatGPT and you'll have anything. But we wouldn't say that, right? I was with someone that and are very close with them. We'll bring our guests on in a moment. We had a great conversation with them, and we were in a restaurant, and he gave the young lady behind the counter, and he did this in a loving way because it's going to sound pretty harsh, but he really did this sweet and loving. He said to her, if you could figure out how much change I get without a calculator, you could keep it the rest as a tip. If you can't, I get my change back. That was an awkward moment for a moment, let's just say. But his point was to her, like, and I'm sure she wanted to take out her cell phone, like take out the calculator. Hey, Siri, what's $100 minus whatever? What a very generous tip. But his point was, there's some basic skills that you still have to have. You may not have to use it often because we do have the ease of taking out the calculator, but you got to have to know how. So why?
Right.
The AI. So what's the AI impact on, like, why sit and learn the daf? Why sit and learn Torah? You could just speak into AI and know anything you need to know.
Wow.
So are we going to dumb down drive for knowledge and learning? And I don't know. There's a lot of questions. I don't know answers to any of these. I just think there's a lot of questions. A lot of questions.
Well, I'm happy to put in at the end with the assistance of AI. So, first of all, no one would ever imagine that I was able to write that. So it's either someone else or it's AI.
In partnership with AI.
Yeah, but it's my ideas. I have ideas in my head. I just want to get them on paper.
Whoa, my phone on it. I said Siri, and now it's on it. I don't know what happened. Anyway, very excited to be able to bring on our guest this evening for an incredible conversation. Bracha Poliakoff is actually the one who had the idea of this book in memory of her mother, Reclaiming Dignity. She's a licensed clinical social worker, speaker, and writer. She serves as the founder and director of continuing education at Bright Ideas Continuing Education, high-quality continuing education programs for mental health professionals in the United States and Canada. She's taught Torah in high school to adults. She finds herself giving back, making a difference on the board of a shul in Richmond, Virginia, the Women's Institute of Torah in Baltimore, Maryland now, and part of the Associated Young Leadership Council at the Orthodox Union Women's Initiative, and doing so much more. So we're very excited to have Bracha on. And of course, Rabbi Anthony Manning, who is a really well-known educator, has had an enormous impact, taught in Michlala, Sha'aram, MMY, now the co-director of Midrasha Tila since 2017, senior lecturer at Chappelle's Midrasha Rachel, a weekly shir in the OU Israel Center in Yerushalayim. He was a Talmud learned in Rav Berkovitz's Kollel, the Jerusalem Kollel, semichah from Rav Berkovits and from Rav Zalman Nechemia Goldberg. Zatzal, they live in Alon Shvut, right near my brother, as a matter of fact. And they are both fantastic, and we're really excited to have them on about their brand new book. This could be it. This could be their premiere interview. I'm not even sure about their incredible new book, Reclaiming Dignity. Without any further ado, it is a pleasure and a privilege. What an honor to be joined to go behind the Bima with the great Rabbi Manning, Bracha Poliakoff, the authors of a brand new, fantastic book that is already being received to great acclaim, and that is Reclaiming Dignity, which is an incredible book on a guide to tzniut, a guide to modesty for men and women. Welcome to you both. Thank you for going behind the Bima with us.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldberg.
Thank you for having us.
So you each have fascinating backgrounds. You're involved in chinuch and education and mental health support and social work and a range of different things, which we will have to get into. But we want to jump right into this book because it's a pretty ambitious and audacious thing to say we're going to introduce a book on a topic that people stay away from. No one knows how to navigate, that can be controversial, that is divisive, that some have claimed have turned them off altogether, that seem to focus on the wrong things. And you two collaborated to put together a book, a sefer really, that says we're bringing a new perspective, a new angle, a new approach, and it's going to change things. In fact, Rabbi Berkovits, in his foreword to the book, essentially says this, that Rabbi Manning, when you handed him the book, he had pretty low expectations. You don't really see this in a haskama, in an approbation very often. Like my Talmud gave me the book, I had pretty low expectations, but wow, he far surpassed them, and it's excellent. So tell us a little bit about this collaboration, how it came about, and why you decided to tackle a topic so many people try to avoid.
Okay, so I guess I'll start since I initiated the process of the book. So for me, tzniut was always something incredibly challenging to connect to and relate to. I had a lot of negative associations and just challenges relating, connecting, understanding the mitzvah of tzniut. And it's something I struggled with for a long time. As a young adult, I started, delving more deeply into the topic, trying to find approaches that worked for me, and slowly started to kind of repair my own relationship with this topic. But as that process was happening, I was just noticing around me, so many other people were struggling. This was not about me or my own experience, but it was very universal. Not to say that everybody struggles with it, but it was very, very common. And one of the things that was happening around the same time was I was in a Facebook group for Frum women with thousands and thousands of women in the group. And every time someone posted a question related to tznius, it might have been the most benign, innocent question, they would get these horrible responses and judgment and shaming and anxiety and anger. And it was just bringing up these really strong emotions in people more than any other topic. And as a clinical social worker, I would look at these conversations unfolding, and it just seemed like there was a lot of trauma because the responses were so disproportionate to the questions. There's actually a phrase in therapy. They say, if it's hysterical, it's historical. And so I'd look at these comment threads and just see that high level of anxiety. And I know, Rabbi Manning, you can probably speak to this as well, that, sometimes when you bring up this topic in a group of women or girls, you just see like the levels of anxiety in the room rise. There's like this tension, and it's actually palpable. It could be people listening to this podcast right now are probably feeling the same way. And so I was just seeing a lot of this around me. And at the same time, again, I was trying to find my own path through it. And that's how the book really got started, was how do I take what I'm learning and my own experiences, my own challenges, and help other people who are finding themselves in a similar situation.
There probably isn't a word or topic more that all you say is the word tznius, and people's guard is up and they're defensive. And you're 100% right. I know I've experienced that too. And I'm the type of rabbi, I'm not afraid to try to take on difficult topics in writing and sermons and shiurim and classes. But it's kind of like, you already know in the audience, there'll be people, you're a man, you're not entitled to say anything about tznius, or like you said, the trauma of the person who said it the wrong way, or this is all anyone cares about and it's the whole way they judge. So it is such an audacious topic. So Rabbi Manning, how did you decide to take it on and associate sort of your name with it if you didn't get it right?
Right. So my background on this topic was, I think, quite similar to many other. I was a young religious man. I really hadn't thought too much about it. This was not a topic that addressed me much as a man. I found myself, I used to be a real estate lawyer. That's another conversation, or maybe later in this conversation. But I was in Ateres Yisrael in my early 30s, learning Torah in Kollel. And I came across Rav Berkovits, his semichah Kollel, and I really connected with his structural approach and his general halachic depth. And I went into his Kollel, and we did a lot of standard semichah things with Yoreh Yoreh, etc. But then all of a sudden he introduced a detailed analysis of Bein Adam L'Chavero, which features in the book, interpersonal laws in a very intense way in the Kollel. But also he had a module on tznius. And this, to all of us, I think, as young men in the Kollel, was very surprising. Why are we sitting here learning about tzniut? And when I heard this, it was incredibly enriching, empowering, inspiring, exciting. It was something that I'd never read anywhere. Obviously, I'd read around on the topics, generally, but I'd just never heard an approach like this before. It wasn't directed specifically towards women. It was directed towards all Jews, maybe even all humans, but it was directed towards us in the Kollel as young men. And I went on from there into educating young women. And tzniut is maybe 2% of what I teach. I'm in a lot of different areas, but I made it a fixed thing to teach these ideas in maybe 2 or 3 classes in the year in the midrashah that I was involved in, and other ones that I was a speaker at. And I just received such a lot of positive feedback. Young women who were saying, why has no one ever said this to me before? No, why has no one ever raised these ideas in this structural way before? It's not even as if I was saying anything radically, specifically different. It was just the way that the topic was framed. And I ended up putting these shiurim on my website. I have a website with a few hundred shiurim. And then I was approached by Bracha about 3 or 4 years ago, who said, listen, these forums that she mentioned, the women who are talking about this tend to be directing each other to my website. And she thought, well, this is a pattern that she's seeing. Maybe I would like to, write up this whole topic as a proper sefer. And of course, I said exactly what you intimated, what any sensible rabbi would say, which is, forget about it. I'm not touching this in the public arena. I'm not writing a book about this. But then COVID came, And Bracha very gently said, well, are you sure you still don't want to write this book? What are you doing anyway, sitting there on Zoom all day?
You have some time on your hands now.
Exactly. I forget about the fact that I was running an institution, remotely, whatever. And I said, okay, let's give it a go. Let's see where it goes. Let's try it and develop. And then that's how the book was born. Honestly, without Bracha's gentle but consistent, encouragement, the whole project would never have happened. But together we partnered with Mosaica, and the rest, as they say, is history.
So we'll get into the details of the book and this approach to tznius, hopefully sensitively and in a way that we don't lose audience members or listeners. I'll tell you, one of the great things I love about the book is before you even get into the book, and that is the diversity of the haskamas, the rabbis who gave their approbation to the book. I always, as a person who identifies by not identifying, I identify by the shar hakollel, this notion of drawing the best of Yiddishkeit from all over, of not belonging to any one specific segment, of trying to be a blend of so much and not needing to fit narrowly into one place. I'm always drawn to, I love when I open a sefer, a book, and I see, this author wasn't afraid to say, I would love the haskama of this one and that one, and that these Rabbanim weren't afraid or hesitant to give the haskama. So when you open the book, you have Rabbi Weinreb of the OU, Rav Yitzchak Breitowitz of Or Sameach, Rav Moshe Hauer, Rabbi Zev Leff, Rav Aaron Lopiansky, Rav Yosef Tzvi Rimon of Alon Shvut, Rav Shechter of YU, an incredible diverse array. I don't know how many books have all of those people in one place. So was that very important to you? Why was it important to you to reflect the diversity of the big Rabbanim, of the great Rabbanim, to put their letters in? Did any of them hesitate? Do they worry, well, if someone else's, I don't want mine, because then, did they ask you, to whom is this book geared? Maybe I don't want a haskama on a book that's geared to the too modern, or to the too right wing, or to the too yeshivish. Is it being written in Ashkenazis or in Sfaradit? Were there hangups or delays or hesitations for those haskamas, or did they read it and say, wow, this is important, this is a new angle, this can make a difference, and absolutely, here's my letter, we're all in? What was that process like, getting this diversity and the range of Rabbanim?
Maybe I'll say a word on that, and I'm sure Bracha has what to say. Look, the reality is that all these people are incredibly busy. So the most difficult practical thing in getting anybody on board in the project is just to actually get people to give it any time when they're running Klal Yisrael in so many ways. And I honestly chased around 3 continents without any exaggeration, being a nudnik a little bit, and speaking to these people and saying, this is a project that I really feel that you'd like to connect with. And honestly, once they actually had the time to focus on it, there was an incredibly positive reaction back, because this is a very different book. One of the reasons that I wanted this array of different important Gedolim involved is because this book goes out of its way to avoid the delegitimization of other communities, which so often is part of the conversation on tznius. And this is one of the reasons, and I'm sure Bracha has a lot to say on this, why it's so damaging and traumatizing, because people use this as a stick in order to judge others. So that's one of the reasons, why this range of people is involved, because we do want this book to connect with different communities, to recognize that there are different community practices. Yes, of course, there are objective red lines. That's the halachic system, but there are within that genuinely different subjective community practices. So it was very important for me to get these people involved. And I must say, I was overwhelmed by how positive they were. And they spoke to each other. You should just know that they called each other to talk about the book. And they read the book, actually, because I actually got very specific comments on footnotes that I said here and there. So it's not just they saw my name. I'm not American. Most of these haskamas came from America. Nobody knew me and said, oh yeah, he looks like a good fellow, it's probably fine. They actually looked at the book, and it is, as you say, a very tricky topic. But I was very excited in order to receive them and to have the opportunity to discuss the topic with these people, which was incredible.
It's almost, and Bracha, I want to hear what you have to say, but before you actually get into the book, it's almost in itself an enormous breakthrough just to have that diversity of haskamas. Because I know if I were in a Sfarim store, a bookstore, and I open a book like this, or, I get a lot of books, Baruch Hashem, I'm grateful for that. One of the first things I do is open up and look, okay, haskamas. Like, before I expose myself or dive into this new view of tznius, who endorses it? Who believes in this new view? Even if the book has merit in its own right, but if you don't necessarily, and I do know both of you, if you don't know the personalities, you don't know whether, in fact, it is sort of a legitimate view. And the fact that, and I don't want to single people out, but Rav Shechter, Rav Lopiansky, and Rav Rimon, and Rav Breitowitz, Rav Berkovits, and they all say this is a book that can be read in Alon Shvut, and it can be read also in Sanhedrin Morchevet. This is a book that can be read in Baltimore, and it can be read in, and that's enormous. That's enormous accomplishment, and really kudos to the two of you to produce something that the diverse range of Rabbanim say each of our communities can, should, and will gain from reading it. So, Bracha, what did that mean to you? Was that very important to you as well?
Yeah, it was very, very meaningful. It actually reminded me in Rabbi Manning's introduction, I think, or maybe it was in the beginning of the book where you write, just having this cross-section of contributors, Dayenu, but I think we need to, add this point as well, that just having these haskamos, like really Dayenu, to have these incredible Rabbanim all together in one book. Like you said, it's really unusual. It was interesting. Of all the people that we approached, I think only 2 people turned us down, just to show you how incredible the response was. And one of them asked his colleague to sign instead. And then the other one said, I will not touch your book with a 10-foot pole just because of the title and the topic. So there was a little pushback from one chashuva person that we did approach, but otherwise the feedback was incredible. A lot of them knew, some of them knew us, some of them did not know us. And I did tear up, getting these haskamos back and just seeing the level of leadership that a Rav would be willing to put his name again on a book of this topic. That was diverse, and it was really, really special and meaningful to me personally.
Did those 2 rabbis give you any specific reason why they can't?
So one of them doesn't give haskamos to books unless they're written by his talmidim, I believe. So that's, wasn't personal. And the other one said it was right around the time there was a big scandal with lace top shaitels. And he said, I don't know if you know what's going on in the shaitel situation, but I will not go. I'm not even opening the book because I don't want to open it, because I don't want to read it, because I don't want to get involved. So
that's better, by the way. Had he said, I read it and I don't want to put my name on it.
Right. He wouldn't even open it. He said, I'm not opening it. It's sitting on my desk and I'm not going to open it.
Right, because it's not personal to you. It's not personal. It's the topic.
Yeah.
But it makes you have even more respect and reverence for those who did, because it means they have broad shoulders. They're not looking over their shoulder, and they have broad shoulders, and they don't really care. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the book, and here there's a disclaimer, I'm very honored that you included an essay of mine in the book. I'm flattered and honored. Why was that important to divide a book 2 parts? Rabbi Manning, you wrote the whole approach philosophically, halachically, the whole second half of the book, which is a major contribution. But you also took a risk by including people like me and others in the first half of the book, which you didn't control. I mean, you controlled it in that you were the editors and produced the book. But why was it important to have 2 halves? Why was it important to include other voices instead of just producing a book that had the philosophy of Rabbi Manning that was working for you and for others, as evidenced by the group that Bracha was in?
Well, we wanted this book to have voices from different communities. There is a range of different orthodox approaches on this issue, and therefore we really set out, for there to be a lot of women's voices in the book. This is an extremely important point. Now, this is maybe something we'll discuss, but the idea that only a woman can talk about tzniut, unfortunately, plays into the narrative that tzniut is all about clothing and women's bodies, which this book argues very strongly that it's not. But nevertheless, it's very important to have a lot of women's voices on this issue, and therefore we went out of our way to try and do this. 23 out of the 26 contributing authors in the anthology are women, but they're from a range of different backgrounds. You have women from Chabad, from the modern Orthodox world, the religious Zionist world, the Beis Yaakov world, the Yeshivish world, however you want to define any of these labels, OU, YU, etc. And that was critical because we need this book to be a book that tries to speak to many people. One of the challenges of existing books on this topic, it's really been written for a very specific set of the community, structure, but then applied universally to the entire Jewish people, which obviously immediately is a clash which could have been avoided. So we really wanted to have that, and we also wanted the book to be readable and accessible and enjoyable by a range of different people. As you mentioned, my part is more philosophical and more hashkafic, lots of footnotes, very detailed. The essays approach people from different angles, and it's really important to us that this is a family book. This is a book that we want fathers to learn with their daughters and mothers to learn with their sons, and therefore these essays really add incredibly to that and give it a complete form, I think.
Bracha, what was that process like of deciding who to invite or include in the first half of the book? Because there are so many talented people, but people do come with, again, associations. Some are beloved by this community but criticized by another. You don't have to obviously don't give us the gory details,
right?
But what was the process like? Was that more complicated than you thought it would be?
It wasn't complicated. I mean, it was hard. It wasn't complicated. Like, I didn't really. Again, I was surprised. Just like with the Haskamos, I was just really blown away by people's positivity, their response. Almost everybody I reached out to said, "Count me in," which again is like really blew my mind as someone again who's looked at this, as something that could be controversial, and for people to just say, "I'm in. Tell me what you want me to do," was really, really special. And another reason I really liked having the essays in addition to Rabbi Manning's section is that Rabbi Manning's section was very much focused on a more meta halachic perspective. And I really wanted to pull in perspectives on other things related to tznius that were a little bit beyond the halacha. So for example, the middah of tznius, which is something, we don't talk about enough as a community and also applies both to men and women. I really wanted that to kind of run through that first section, which I think really does come out clearly when you read through those essays. And other perspectives like, Rabbi Goldberg, your own perspective is not something that Rabbi Manning touched on in his section. So I really felt like each of the contributors was able to really look at this from their perspective, their own experiences. And again, like Rabbi Manning said, that diversity of experience and diversity of the people that we reached out to really made this book such a richer book because of it.
Did anyone submit something that you had to reject or suggest significant edits to?
Both.
Okay.
I rejected about 3 or 4 essays because again, they didn't fit with what we were trying to accomplish, the tone of the book. And then there was a couple essays that just needed hours and hours and hours of editing to try to make them readable. And I did, again, even though my job was more behind the scenes, there were certain themes that I really wanted to encourage in the essay section. And so I did sometimes send the essay back and say, could you focus more on this piece of it or that piece of it? Can you develop this more? To again, even though they're so different, you'll kind of see that some of them do have themes and patterns that repeat throughout the essays.
Fantastic. Rabbi Brody, you had a question? Did I lose Rabbi Brody there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Internet.
Can you hear me?
Sorry. Okay. Yes. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
just wonder, what's the appropriate age? You mentioned before mothers studying with sons or fathers studying with daughters. What's the appropriate age to begin this discussion on tznius?
Look, I think if you understand tznius as the book presents as an awareness of your personal dignity, and let's face it, tzniut is ruled in the Shulchan Aruch as to how a person, doesn't specifically relate to men or women generally, how a person behaves when they're in a private place in terms of their own consciousness of their own dignity, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in the world, and there's a kind of behavior that is beneath us. If you present tzniut, which is actually the Torah mitzvah, that's in the 613 in that way, this is what we teach all the time, even to very small children, in the sense that this behavior is appropriate to this situation, and this behavior is appropriate to that situation, and that conversation you can have with a 4-year-old. I'm not suggesting you should be talking to them about their clothing. That's a completely different conversation, which comes much later. But understanding that tzniut is not about the specific clothes that you wear only, and its foundation is about your sense of self-consciousness and dignity as a human being, and then as a Jew in private and then in public. This is a very valid conversation, I think, to have with any child from the age at which they're self-conscious of their own presence around others and their own individuality. So I think as long as the conversation develops and evolves in a way which is commensurate with the age and maturity of the child and then teenager. Obviously, with teenagers, it gets much more difficult because there's a lot of other issues that get funneled into every conversation, and that's a different kind of profession, if you like, dealing with teenage conversations. But I think you can start this conversation, and I think intuitively we do, even from a young age, as long as we're clear that it's not about dressing people in this particular way. The book does deal with from what age should a child, a boy or a girl, be wearing clothing which is, has the parameters of tzniut as we know it as an adult, and in that, basically the position of the Chazon Ish is around, when, let's say, for a young woman, when she presents as a a young woman rather than a little child, maybe 7, 8, 6, whatever. I'm not getting into the details, but that's almost a peripheral issue. The real central issue is the core of tznius, which I think we have with our children when they're even younger.
Yeah, even when a child first goes to sleepaway camp and you talk about, how do you get dressed and undressed and shower and what's appropriate touch and what's appropriate everything, and being aware of other people's inappropriate touch, those are all part of the conversations and opening for tznius too. So let's dive right in. And I'm going to dive in this way. A woman says to you, as have said to me, say, Rabbi, if a man shouldn't be looking at certain things and it can create certain arousal, desire, or temptation, that's his problem, not mine. Why do I have to cover up? Why do I have to not be able to use my talent of my voice and sing in public? Why do I have to, in the Florida Boca heat in the middle of August, look like a total standout and freakish in my overdress? Because men have this animal impulse appetite problem. It's your problem. You go control yourself and let me dress the way I want to dress. Let me sing the way I want to sing. Let me act and behave the way I want to act and behave. You guard you. Why do I have to cover up in order to protect and help you? What's your answer to them?
Well, the first thing is that the reason that a person is behaving and dressing in a certain way is not in order to protect the religious integrity of men. That's a side issue which we can talk about, which is lifnei iver. But the first important thing is that this topic is often taught, in my opinion, in an incorrect way, is that women specifically are given the impression that the reason, the obligation, if you like, in terms of the mitzvah of tzniut is in order to protect men, as if men are somehow unexploded bombs walking around that could be detonated at any second by the wrong encounter. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a mitzvah of lifnei iver. This is a Torah mitzvah, and every single Jew has to be conscious of the impact that their behavior, speech, whatever has on other people. We don't want to bring other people into situations where they feel compromised and they're doing things that are not the right thing to do. That's a basic consideration between one Jew and another Jew. And it's part of this mitzvah as well. We wouldn't want to put people in a position where we're leading them down the wrong track. But that is not the foundation of the mitzvah of tznius. That's very, very important. Before you even get to lifnei iver as a discussion, there's an entire structure of tznius that we dress in a certain way because of our internal dignity, and the effect that we have on other people is relevant, but it's peripheral. Ultimately, men have the responsibility for their own halachic observance. Women are not responsible for the halachic observance of men. Everybody is responsible to help everybody else keep Torah in the best way they can. But for example, the halachah is very clear. Men, if a man looks even at the little finger of a woman in an inappropriate way, the Gemara specifically says that, that's considered to be a very serious aveira. But women are not required to cover up their little fingers in order to prevent men from doing that. There is a line at which men absolutely take responsibility. So it's a combination, I think, between educating as to what tznius really is, which is something much deeper than the lifnei iver, and then also, bringing people into the lifnei iver conversation in a way which is healthy and not putting the blame and responsibility on women for something which is ultimately not theirs.
So it's reorienting the entire conversation from modesty being about between the sexes or genders to modesty being about our own dignity and the way we carry ourselves. And if you lived in a deserted island with no one of the opposite gender or sex, you still need to carry yourself with modesty because it's about you and your dignity. Bracha, what would you say to the next something I've received? I have 6 daughters and a young son, and thank God, Baruch Hashem, B'li Ayin Hara, so proud of my daughters and where they're at. But certainly when you're raising young daughters, adolescent daughters figuring out their way, and you can give them this wonderful book, Reclaiming Dignity. They could read it from cover to cover. They could memorize and tell it back. They could tell you how inspired they are. And then they, not my kids, others want to test the limits. So they walk out with a skirt that rises a little above the knee. That's what everybody's wearing. It's a certain tightness, the shirt, a certain breach of the normal standards of tznius. And you've told them, and you've tried to inspire them, and you've made it not negative, and you take away the trauma, and yet they're still testing the limits. Every time they get dressed, every time they leave your home, or they leave your home dressed the way that you would want, but then you encounter or you get feedback or you see a picture, because today people post their status updates and everything else. Bracha, how do you relate to these young women? Again, we'll get to men because we know tznius is not only about women, but what's the best way? What do we crack down? Do you hold accountable? Are there consequences? What does one do?
So first of all, I think that's pretty normal for teenagers to test limits. So we just have to kind of keep that in the back of our minds, that these are normal behaviors that all teenagers do, to some extent in different ways. But I'm really not qualified to talk about this because I only have boys, ironically. It's actually funny. I was talking with Eliza Bulau 3 or 4 years ago, probably right before this project started. And she said to me, one thing she's seeing in her work she does programming for women. And so one thing she's seeing a lot with these women that are in her programs is that those women who went through more of like a Bayit Vegan type system and didn't always relate to the way they were taught certain things or struggle with certain aspects of the system, well, now that they're having daughters and sending their daughters in that same system, it's bringing up like all this trauma and anxiety for them because they realize that these issues they thought they were done with, they dealt with, are now being, resurfacing through their children. And as soon as she said that, I said, well, I don't have that problem, my boys. And she said, the way you said that was such relief and so quickly shows you have the exact same problem. And so really with this book specifically, again, I can't offer practical guidance on this issue, although we do have one author in the book who does, Dr. Yocheved, who has a wonderful article very specific to this topic. What I would say about it is that the goal of the book is not for a parent to take this 680-page book and stick it in their daughter's hands. I actually think the book is more appropriate for adults anyway than for teenagers. So I would caution parents to read through it themselves first before they pass it on to their daughters. But the goal is exactly like that conversation I had with Eliza Bulau, is how do we repair and reclaim our own relationship? Because so much of what we're seeing now is the trickle effects of these parents who are not healed, right? Who are still struggling, who still have that, or as my rabbi called it, tznius PTSD, right? That trauma, that anxiety, and it's still there. And maybe they've kind of, brushed it, under the carpet for a while, but it's coming back up for them now with their own children. And so much of this is about modeling and about reclaiming our own relationship so that we can then give it over to our children in a way that's healthy and helps them relate to it.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, one thing that's very interesting to me about this whole conversation is that tznius, one of the things we really try to show in the book is that tznius is a really important value. I think like 40 of the contributors quote mitzvah in their essay, that tznius is in the divine top 3 list, right? We have mishpat, chesed, and tznius, right? And so this is a really important value to us as Jews. And we have so many people who are walking around who have these strained relationships. And I always think about, if someone would come to us and tell us, I hate Shabbos, like I wish we could just like not have Shabbos, we would be so hurt and sad for that person and like just wonder, like, what are we doing wrong as a community that people are walking around with this damaged relationship, right? And we'd find ways to help them connect and spiritually connect to Shabbos so that it is part of their relationship with Hashem and with Judaism. But again, we have these women who really are struggling. It could be there's men too. I only hear about the women, but who are struggling with this relationship. And again, then how are they going to give it over to their own children, to their own students, to their friends, the people that they come in contact with if they themselves haven't worked it through first?
Wow.
If I could come in with a point and pick up on something also, chinuch is about long-term goals as well as short-term goals. Rav Volbe's famous book, Planting and Building, which is sometimes as a parent, as a teacher, you need to draw a line and say this is something that needs to stop now. But usually and more fundamentally, you're planting seeds that have to take time to germinate. So I think always when you're having a conversation about chinuch, there has to be a long-term goal. And one has to pick one's moments. Having a confrontation as a child walks out of the door, and you can't go out wearing that, is exactly the wrong moment to have any kind of meaningful conversation about these issues. It's just doomed to failure from the start. So that's one point, which is long-term goals and picking your moments. But also, and I mentioned in the book, sometimes children and teenagers especially, they channel certain questions through, let's say, tzniut, but they're not really about tzniut. If someone turns around and says, well, why does God care if I wear a short skirt or have a third ear piercing or whatever it is? That's not really a question about tzniut. That's a question of, why is halachah important? What does it do for God? What does it do for me? And it's actually a deeply philosophical question. It's nothing to do with tzniut. And therefore, there has to be an opportunity to have that conversation, which will then flow over into other issues too.
So that's actually fascinating and brilliant. John Gottman, the great marriage authority, he says that every time a couple have a fight, there was a conversation that needed to happen, and the fight happened instead. And what you're saying, Rabbi Manning, is often with tznius, there was a conversation that needed to happen, and a fight over tznius happened instead. So instead of the battle being over the skirt length or over what you're watching or you're going out or your device or whatever it is, there's a more fundamental conversation about Hashem, halacha, does he care about details, our dignity, and we shouldn't, instead of the conversations we need to be happen, we shouldn't be distracted by having a fight over the symptom instead of over the core issue that's there. Rabbi Brody.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in schools, is this something which other teachers perhaps have reached out to you and said, maybe we should design some sort of curriculum around this topic? I imagine that, listen, part of the problem might be coming from the schools. If they don't know how to teach it, then our kids are going to grow up in a world where this becomes a very, very challenging situation.
Yeah, for sure. I work mostly with the post-high school crowd. I run a gap year program, but I'm in high schools all the time. And every high school I go to tells me that this is a challenge. And it doesn't matter where you are, if you like, on the hashkafic spectrum, as if it were linear, which it's not, of course, but let's just pretend. Everyone is having a challenge finding the right words to get this across. And therefore, we've really been approached by people from many different backgrounds. Women in the Bayit Vegan world, one of them, Fegi Zeltzer, who has an essay in the book, who herself has developed a curriculum on these issues and is keen to integrate ideas from the book and from Rav Berkovits, because let's face it, these are coming ultimately from him, into her syllabus, and has actually very successfully done that in over 70 Bayit Vegan high schools. At the same time, I'm having conversations with people who are working with the modern Orthodox high schools, the YU high schools, who are having a different kind of conversation, or more often than not, no meaningful conversation, because it's hard to frame it. And they're also looking to write these ideas into a broader curriculum of Yeshivat mitzvot and try and do this. So that for us in writing this book, we're trying to start a conversation, and that conversation involves curriculum writers, it involves teachers, it involves the entire community, so that we can kind of push this into its correct place. This is not the only issue in the world, maybe not even the most important issue in the world, but it's an issue which we're getting wrong, and it's causing a lot of unnecessary damage. And if we can get into that conversation in the high schools, then I think we can do a lot of work. And there's a lot of ears that are open to this. We found that in putting together the book.
It's interesting, the topics, and I'm just looking through the topics, the halachic analysis, and it's really so great and so comprehensive. The second half of the book, from the hashkafic introduction, then defining tznius, lifnei Hashem, interpersonal mitzvos, not judging, not rejecting others, how we deal with machlokas, debate, lifnei iver, not contributing to bringing people down or not being jealous and envious, tznius in public, clothing in public, tznius and das Yehudis. Fantastic clothing in public for men and women, defining community, visiting other communities, Jewish and non-Jewish clothing. You've got erva in the Torah, not looking at invisible women, pictures and policies, not being shomer negia, kol isha, head covering, which was I'm sure a tough topic, the different customs and not sounding judgmental about how one covers their hair. Then tznius for men, bathing, clothing, men's tznius in front of women, men's tznius in society. Did you get into the topic of shmiras heinayim, of men having to guard their eyes? And while we associate, and Bracha, you pointed out, I think 23 out of 26 contributors, you said, were women, and we immediately associate tznius as a woman's topic. One might argue that with the explosion of technology, the challenge of tznius has now changed from being harder on women to harder on men. So maybe for history, women bearing the burden of how they dress and how they sing and so on. But today, for men, just this week, I had a meeting with somebody who asked actually for a group of men to have a private meeting where people could be vulnerable and share and talk. This enormous challenge of what's out there and the opportunity due to technology and other things, this sexualized world we're living in and the ease of watching, looking at, acting out. Do you think tznius today is harder for men or harder for women? And does the book dive into this part of tznius, about men preserving their own dignity by not breaching the boundary of tznius in watching things they shouldn't be looking at?
Right. Look, it does to some degree. I don't think this is a new conversation for men. I think men know that there's an issue of shmiras einayim. They've been told that classically. Women are told about tznius and men are told about shmiras einayim, even though, of course, it does work in the other direction as well. Shmiras einayim is a relevant topic for women. And in our society that we live in today, the classic, boundaries between men and women and what men do and what women do are not as clear as they once were. So I think this is an important topic, but you're right. Primarily, this is a men's challenge. The book does deal with this and halachically and hashkafically, but I think it goes much deeper as well. The first 5 chapters of the book that don't specifically mention men or women are addressed to everybody, which is that there's a whole conversation with men that they're not even aware that they should be having. They know about shmiras einayim, and male educators, which really I'm not qualified because I don't really teach men, have to find ways to help young men to deal with those issues for sure. I went to a Rosh Yeshiva because I'd like to take this book into the yeshivas as much as into the seminaries and have conversations with young men, not just about shmiras einayim, but about the whole concept. This is a mitzvah for them. I went to one Rosh Yeshiva and said, I'd like to come into your yeshiva to talk about tzniut. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, for sure. He says, what are you going to tell them? What they should wear on the beach? So I said, no, that is a very narrow perspective on tzniut, which is just what you imagine tzniut is for women, and you transferred it on to your male students. It's much, much deeper than that, and there's a lot more going on halachically, not just hashkafically, that they need to be aware of. Having said that, there are even clothing issues that men are painfully unaware of, that women actually are quite disturbed by. Men, don't think twice about how they're walking around dressed. You can have a guy, in cycling, shorts, just been on a bicycle, and then spends the next 3 hours walking around the shopping mall, dressed really for a cycle race, not for a trip around the shopping mall, and oblivious to the fact whether that's right or wrong. Here in Israel last year, there was a fascinating movement. There was a young group of religious Zionist women that started something, I think they called it something like mitzvah boxerim, like the Operation Boxer Shorts, to try and get through to young religious men. These are young, frum men that go hiking in the forest, and they see a pool or a mayan or a well or whatever it is, a spring. They just strip off down to their boxer shorts and jump in, completely oblivious to the fact there are women around who actually find it very disturbing, and they didn't even give a thought because their mind is so focused on erva and it doesn't apply to them and sneeze doesn't apply to them, that there actually is an angle there as well. So there, for men, it is, you're right, about shmiras einayim, and that's a whole massive chapter. But there are a lot of other things as well they need to get clear. And maybe if they got more insight into these other more holistic ideas, then shmiras einayim would not just be a decontextualized issue that they're struggling with, but part of a broader understanding of who they are and what they owe to themselves.
Yeah, you gotta wonder the minds of those people who just strip down publicly, unaware of their surroundings and how other people perceive them. I want to take it another direction, and I have not finished the book, admittedly. I don't know if it's in there or both of your opinions outside of it. We talked about Bracha. You talked about what really precipitated the catalyst for the book were being exposed to women who have such PTSD from people who address tznius incorrectly to begin with. And I think there's a world of women who've walked away even from frumkeit, and certainly their own self-image, their own self-esteem, their own self-awareness, their own dress. Tznius was addressed so poorly that they turned off to it. But I think there's another phenomenon that we're not speaking about, and I don't know that this is the time or place to get deeply into it, but that is people who are taught tznius the wrong way also, who practice too much tznius in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'm talking about its negative impact on marriage, particularly women from a certain background where there was such an emphasis on you have to always cover up, and men are pigs and they're animals and they only want this from you and they're looking at this from you. So you need to cover up and distance yourself from those piggish, shkutzim animal men. And they then get married. And now they're meant to connect romantically with their husbands. And even in an intimate setting, they struggle with understanding or appreciating intimacy as a fundamental part of marriage. And when, in the Rambam's perception, when you close a certain door in a right time with the right person at the right place, that you should not be unsneous there, but that's not the time to practice. So I don't know. I think I won't call it equally, but also inappropriately taught at a young age is that, just like with kosher, there's a time and a place to eat and so on. So similarly here with tznius, there's a time and a place to practice it. And there are definitely enormous challenges in marriages and shalom bayis in the area of intimacy, because what people were embedded and imbued with at a young age, well, what happens is they think they're marrying this Ben Torah, and it turns out that this Ben Torah is a human being, and he has certain desires. And now what happened? Because all the years, 18, 19, 20 years of her education said, only an animal, a shegitz, a lowlife wants and craves those things, and you need to cover up, to distance or protect from that. And it turns out this Ben Torah, this guy that she married, who's learning in Kollel, is an animal. So I don't know if you get into that in this book, but if you have thoughts on sort of part of the tznius conversation, also contextualizing it is, when should it be practiced, and when davka are you in a setting where it's expressed differently, and you have to understand that intimacy and romance in marriage with the right person, the right time, the right place is not a breach of tznius. It is consistent with tznius.
Yeah, I think that second point is so important, is that people think of it as, now I'm tznius and now I'm not. And when you read this book, you'll see that it's the exact opposite. They're both tznius, right? Tznius is a lot about discernment and self-respect, like Rabbi Manning talks about. And it's exactly that, figuring out what's needed in that moment. And so it's not turning off or turning on tznius. It's expressing that tznius in a different way, in a different time and place. So I am not an expert in this topic, although I did speak with a number of college teachers throughout this process. One of them wrote an article in our book, but she did not want to write about this topic in that setting. She actually wrote about something else. But I spoke with many college teachers and heard that this is a very common phenomenon across the board, that they're seeing that there's this disordered relationship that women have with their bodies, with tznius, with like so many other things that are really creating serious and significant marriage challenges for them. And again, it's across the board. I don't know if it's more in one community or another community, but I'm hearing this from 10 or 20 women who are in that space. There's actually a wonderful podcast, DMC, with Alexandra Fletcher, who I know has been a past guest on the show. She did a podcast on this topic with Rachel Goldbaum, who trains hundreds and hundreds of college teachers. And she specifically talks about the intersection between tznius and intimacy, and how those two things relate, and how do we teach this in a healthier way so that we can create healthier marriages.
Basically, when women are young, you can think you succeeded in teaching it because they are practicing what we call tznius, right? They're covered and they're carrying themselves and they're not singing and they're not watching. And you think, great, victory, I won. But if you don't get it right, it may look like you won at their young age or publicly, and their marriage has major problems because you didn't win. You embedded the wrong views. And that's why it's so important to get these conversations correct in both directions, right? Mm-hmm. Not to be overly or inappropriately or distorting what tznius is, and not to turn off and create trauma in the wrong way. It's such a delicate and critical conversation.
I'm just saying. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying, I think there's a very big difference between the way guys act and think and the way women act and think. And I can't imagine. I can't even imagine as someone that grows up for 20 years in this world where they feel that they have to act in a certain way, how a couple of conversations with a college teacher is going to turn them into a different. I think we've created a situation which is very, very, very challenging. Mm-hmm. And it's great that she's doing that. I'm so happy she's teaching thousands of teachers, and I didn't even know that was even happening.
There's some really good work happening in this area. There's a lot of really good work going on. There's still a lot we need to do. I've been joking, actually, maybe half joking, that our next book needs to be called Reclaiming Intimacy, and have all the college teachers write articles. But that's even a more controversial and more sensitive topic. So I don't know if we're going to be able to do that. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think there's a lot of work that is being done. So that's the good part.
What's frustrating to me is that there are so many classic sources that deal with this that are just not discussed. All the time that's taken talking about the regulations of how long and short this, sleeve or dress should be, they're taking time away from a conversation about the actual sources, which are fascinating and inspiring. The Shulchan Aruch opens with a discussion about, you're meant to be acting appropriately for the situation that you're in. And the Ramah brings down Vatsnei Alechem there, and he says, think about how to be Lifnei Hashem. It's one of the chapters in the book. The Ramah says this. In every situation, what's the way to be Lifnei Hashem in bed? What's the way to be Lifnei Hashem in the shower, in the marital bedroom, etc.? Tzniut is not about doing a specific thing. It's doing the appropriate thing in the appropriate situation. Think of the conversation between David and Michal, when David is flying his arms all around in the air and to be excited, bringing the Aron Kodesh up to Yerushalayim, and Michal is looking down at him, and she says to him, how could you act in a way which is so lacking in tzniut in front of the maids, etc.? And David says to her, you've read the wrong books on tzniut. That's not what tzniut is. Tzniut is behaving in the appropriate way, in the appropriate circumstance, and this was what was right for this situation. So you're not understanding it, he says. It's fascinating interaction between them. And therefore, there's a lot of sources on this. I'll give you another example. People often teach the source of Kimchis. Kimchis is a very well trodden path in the sense there's this woman, but so aware of her tzniut, she never let the beams of her roof see the hair on her, etc. People are unaware that there is a parallel source about Rabbi Yossi that says almost exactly the same thing, that he was so aware of what tzniut was that he never let the beams of his house, etc. The reason Chazal are doing that is to balance this. Therefore, we need to have a return to the sources. I could call it reclaiming the sources. We have a very vibrant Torah sexual ethic in the sources. It's there, and it needs to be discussed and it needs to be taught, because our kids are going to pick up a sexual ethic from very negative places very quickly. We can't wait until they're having chassan and kala classes. They're picking up those cues from outside society when they're much, much younger. And therefore, we need to be giving them the tools that there is a real conversation, a healthy and exciting one, that the Torah is giving them, so that they have that to turn to rather than everything else.
Yeah, we don't have that luxury anymore. Once upon a time, people didn't notice until a more advanced age, and you had the luxury of having the conversation on your timetable. And technology has changed the world. Not just technology. In Florida, you can't drive down I-95. The billboards, the marketing is so, there's no shame. And I can't even repeat to you the marketing. But you have young children who look out a window, they know how to read, and they say, what does it mean? The air conditioning company is trying to market by saying things that draw your attention. Like, what does that phrase mean? What are they saying? What is that? And you can't drive down a billboard. Right. That's not advertising or marketing.
And there's competing billboards right now between law firms about something which is totally inappropriate, which has nothing to do with law.
And it's like, who could be more outrageous? There's no shame in putting that up on the side of a highway. So we don't have the luxury of waiting to have the conversation on our timetable. You have to have it even earlier. And I agree, whoever drops the anchor of these definitions and approaches and philosophies is going to control the narrative of so much of life. And you see this is a major problem in our time. I've been sharing, based on talking to my rabbinic colleagues and friends, we've talked about the education crisis, the tuition crisis, which was a crisis for a long time, the extreme expense of Jewish education, at least here in America, Rabbi Manning. And we've talked, obviously, the pandemic, Corona definitely occupied our attention for a long time. And I think this intimacy issue and marriage issue and shalom bayis issue and availability for men to act out, or sometimes the disconnect or the being not on the same page or the misunderstandings on these issues, they are growing. It's not spoken about as publicly, and the solution is not as easy, and you can't just simply call everyone into a room and have a conference or convention about it, because it's so delicate and we need to be appropriate. But your book is part of the evidence of that, the need for this book at this time. There's another book called From Boys to Men that came out, which I thought was excellent, really addressing adolescent boys, men, and the topics specific to them. We're seeing this genre emerge of Torah personalities, like the two of you, with the haskama of major people. That other book has a major haskama from Rav Aaron Feldman, who are, just a few years ago, if these books came out, people would have said, we don't talk about this publicly, we don't have one universal approach to it. And it's a new genre because our generation needs it enormously now. Have you received, I know there's been great acclaim and it's well deserved. Have you gotten criticism?
Not yet.
I haven't heard any. Yeah. I've heard really.
Wow.
I just came back from this incredible OU Women's Initiative Leadership Summit, and the buzz was amazing. Like, everyone I spoke to about the book said, is that the book that talks about this? And is that the book? I'm so excited. And I ordered my copy already. And so I've been hearing really, really great feedback. so far. I'm sure there'll be criticism, but we haven't received it yet.
Also, this book is not a book that sets out to tell people what to do. It's not a do this, don't do this kind of book. It's a book that frequently says to people, you need to speak to your own community, speak to your own rabbanim. The book is giving them a structure. It's giving them an understanding of where things come from, how they develop, and how they interface. That is empowering just in understanding the structure without specifically getting into the ins and outs. The book realizes that there are different approaches in different communities and sends people to those communities to find them. So, this book is not trying to transplant or supplant other books. It's trying to give people that essential context that'll also give them confidence in the halachic system. When you just give people rules and tell them this is what the Torah wants you to wear or do, but don't give any context or understanding of where those rules come from, people understandably feel that they're arbitrary. And how do I know you didn't make them up? And if you did make them up, maybe you made all the stuff up that you told me about Shabbos and Kashrus, etc. When you show sources, and we have so many to show, this gives people a sense that, I see where it's coming from. So hopefully this book will not be threatening to people because it's not trying to tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing, but it'll be empowering in the sense it'll connect them and give them more confidence to do what they need to do.
Did you have the full support of
format?
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, because of the format, the way the book was put together, so much of what we're trying to do is, again, helping people reclaim their own relationship with tznius. And that's going to look different for every single person. And so even in the introduction, I write to kind of keep an open mind that some things you're going to like, some things you won't like. Even for me, and I put together these essays, there are essays I really don't love in there, but other people love them, right? Like, we're all going to connect to different things. And there's no right or wrong way to build that relationship. Again, like Rabbi Manning said, it's not saying, here's a list of things you need to do tomorrow. The approach is on understanding where things come from. And that sense of respect for the reader, I think, comes across throughout the book, that people feel respected, that they're being given this information, and then they can choose how they want to proceed with it. One of the people who was actually on our editing team said it was the first time she read a book that had that tone. And she said she actually changed something she was doing or thinking about with tznius because it was the first time she felt respected. She said, I actually was open to hearing what was in the book because I felt respected as a person.
Wow. There's so much to talk about. We didn't even get into your social work, Bright Ideas, continuing education work, and Rabbi Manning, of course, you're extensive in women's seminaries and chinuch, and there's so much more to talk about. So we're looking forward to your sequel, Reclaiming Intimacy, and our sequel, the part 2 of this conversation, to get more into your lives and your backgrounds and your work in other areas as well. But we'll end by thanking you because it's a great contribution to the conversation, to the community, to this area and education. And I'm really excited. Maybe we'll even create a series or really educate based on it, or have continued conversations in our community with our mechanchem and the schools and the like. So thank you for your hard work.
Wow.
Bracha, thank you for not laying off Rabbi Manning, pushing him to produce, and for fighting through to get it done. It's a great gift to the Jewish people. And thank you for being with us on Behind the Bima.
Thank you so
much. Very much.
Thank you. Wow.
Rabbi Brody. So much more to talk about. I feel better.
I know. I think I'm actually going to write a follow-up to this book because I have a lot to talk about, and I want to have a lot to say. It's going to be ChatGPT. I'm going to use that to help write it.
ChatGPT follow-up. First of all, we should have begun with. I feel very bad. Of course, our brothers and sisters in Israel are very much on our hearts and our minds. Absolutely. The hundreds and hundreds of rockets and the incredibly brave chayalim who have been going in to take out these evil terrorists. And I know I've been glued to the news out of Israel all day, couple days, and I got a couple nephews in the army, and thinking about them all the time. So our hearts and our minds are on our brothers and sisters in Israel.
Sure, I'm just shocked. You can turn on CNN or Fox, and no one's talking about it. It's crazy. This happens all the time.
Just to prove to you we're live. CNN's too busy with Donald Trump tonight.
Oh, is that what? Did I miss that?
Yeah, town hall. I missed it too. You missed it. You're doing Behind the Beam. Of course you missed it.
Just watching the Heat game.
It is. The world, can you imagine 400 rockets come over from Mexico into America?
Right.
The American military would wipe out Mexico in 5 minutes.
There would be no Mexico.
5 minutes. But It's not. It sounds simple when you're in the armchair commentator, but when you're in Israel and you have to make the decision, do you take out the terrorist leadership? But who's going to replace them? Maybe people who are worse.
Right.
You know your enemy. But what don't you know about who would replace them, and what will you incite? What retaliation? There's no easy answers with these things.
Right. We always think we've got the great answers.
Yeah, but it is a good thing. Hopefully, when you remove evil from this world, and it sounds like they took out some pretty high-ranking people, even though. Puts the rockets were going towards Tel Aviv today. Like again, the whole country in range. First time ever, the arrow sling was took down a rocket. So again, the Israeli technology is amazing.
I love the biblical references. David's sling. It's great.
Yeah,
it's
incredible. Absolutely incredible.
We took down Goliath. Now we're taking down your rockets.
Yeah, but if you recall, when we had one of the rocket scientists who worked on and helped invent the Iron Dome, he spoke in our shul and he said, this is not a point to be proud, right? A proud army would go in and take out terrorists. We've built this Iron Dome to let you shoot as many rockets as you want, and hopefully it'll got this Iron Dome over our head. Right. So anyway, it's easy from the outside to ask questions. The bottom line is our brothers and sisters in Israel are very much on our thoughts and our minds, especially the American friends of Ateres Kohanim in the Old City. Thank you again for your sponsorship, your partnership. If you're unfamiliar, check it out. Google Ateres Kohanim, learn more about them and their incredible work. We're really grateful for their sponsorship. And as we are counting, not down, but up towards Yom Yerushalayim, think about Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh. It should be rebuilt fully. We should all be there and celebrate together one day in the near future. So go get your copy if you can of Reclaiming Dignity, or the upcoming Reclaiming Intimacy, or Rabbi Brody's response to Reclaiming Intimacy, Reclaiming Intimacy 2.0. I don't know.
Will you write a forward in my
Haskama?
book? Yeah, Haskama.
Just have ChatGPT write one for you.
In your voice.
Fine. Done. It's a deal. Big thank you to Rabbi Manning, Rabbi Poliakoff. Thank you to friends of Ateres Kohanim. And until next week, stay happy, stay healthy, and stay holy.